Well, welcome you guys to Friday morning of our 5 days with the Coalition for the Seriously Ill and our virtual symposium. Appreciate your being here, but really appreciate our leadership and Marisette Hasan, who is our leader and going to be presenting this morning. I wanted to tell you a little bit about her. We've heard from her all week, but give some of her details that she doesn't share all the time. Marisette's a 1981 graduate of University of South Carolina with a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing. Currently, she's the principal and CEO for LifeSprings Consulting Group. And nationally, she's the vice president for community action and policy with CTAC, which is the Coalition to Transform Advanced Care. She's a community co-investigator for the Equal ACP and Equal Space African American Faith Advanced Care Planning Research Project, led by Dr. Kimberly Johnson. Regionally, whoops, sorry, my page flipped. Regionally, she serves as the chair for the Alliance for a Healthier South Carolina and Health Equity Action Committee, a program coordinator consultant for the South Carolina Coalition for the Care of the Seriously Ill. As you know, CSI provides education for clinicians, South Carolina citizens, organizational stakeholders about the benefits of advanced care planning conversations and how to execute their advanced directives. She is passionately engaged in supporting hospice and palliative care providers and policy advocates to increase access and decrease end-of-life disparities for patients and caregivers who live in Black and Brown and underserved communities throughout our state and the region. Marisette, most recently, is a 2024 South Carolina Palmetto Gold Nursing Award recipient. This accolade celebrates nurses who exemplify excellence in nursing practice and commitment to the nursing profession. She is actively engaged with diverse faith communities, sharing messages of hope and encouragement through acts of service and speaking engagements regarding the serious illness care continuum across the Carolinas and social media platforms. And finally, Marisette also resides in Columbia, South Carolina, and she embraces all that is around her role as a wife to Bernard and the mother of 2 young adult children, Bernard II and Sarah Hasan. Well, we welcome you for our final day and to hear from our leader and expert, Marisette Hasan. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori, for the introduction. I'm like Tracy. It's hard to sit through when people are introducing you. We really love just kind of getting into it, right? I'm excited about our topic today and sharing with you some of the things that we have learned. I do want to give a couple of shout outs. First of all, absolutely grateful to the Education Committee for our coalition who put together a wonderful week of topics and amazing speakers and experts under the leadership of Wilma Rice. Wilma's taking a much needed break and is going to be gone for about 2 or 3 weeks. And so we're excited for her to have that opportunity, but definitely want to give kudos to all of our education committee members who work so hard in putting this together. Also, of course, today is International Nurses Day. It's Mental Health Behavioral Month. There's so much going on in May. I heard it was also National Teachers Week this week from some folks who are teachers as well. And of course, Mother's Day is on Sunday. So shout outs to everyone who teaches, who's a nurse, who's a mom, who's just a person who celebrates mothers. You may not have children, but you have a mom. And so excited about that today for everyone. We're going to jump into our topic today. And this is one that is definitely very dear to my heart as I find myself in these last 2-3 years. I have been engaged in a wonderful project through North Carolina that is sponsored by the License to Give Trust Fund. and the Duke Endowment, where we have been going to rural communities in North Carolina, and I've done also some church groups in South Carolina as well, really raising awareness around advanced care planning. And today we're going to talk about these ACP conversations with clinicians and community, faith community perspectives. Next slide, please, Jessica. Thank you. So let's just sort of level set ourselves, guys, as we get started. What actually is advanced care planning? You know, when I'm doing these chats, and I just had a wonderful time with some seniors in South Carolina last week, Tuesday, on the last day of National Healthcare Decisions Month. I was with the Midlands Area Office on Aging, and they had a wonderful lunch and learn for a group of seniors, and they also included their staff. And so we talked about how we make decisions every day, you know, how we plan ahead for all kinds of expected events. We're in the season right now where I know that many of you know somebody who's got a a kindergartner who's graduating. Don't know what's going on with my throat. Let me get some water this morning. There are all kinds of celebrations that are happening today and this weekend and this month in June. Kindergarten graduations, high school, elementary, middle school, weddings, that's right, baby showers. But somehow, when it comes to us talking about what we desire at the end of our life and who we want to be our advocate, we tend to put those conversations off. And so as I share this around the Carolinas, we really remind people that advanced care planning is really about giving your family that gift of conversation and planning for care in advance, just like we plan all these other things. Now, I am absolutely trying to plan an anniversary trip with my husband. We'll be married 26 years soon. You guys can put some hearts up for that. We're almost getting to 30 years, right? And so we aren't really good about planning ahead, you know, for these kinds of trips. But when it comes to advanced care planning, I am absolutely chatting with Bernard about what is it that he desires and what is it that I would desire as well. And putting our healthcare power of attorney in place, making decisions about who's going to speak for you. And for those of you who are on the line, you are the group that probably is right out front having these conversations. I will tell you that even among our clinicians, I was at the palliative care conference for Prisma recently, and I threw the question out because, of course, we were in April, and about half of the room said that yes, they had their plans in order, and about half of the room said yes, they had begun having those conversations. And then you want to put your plans in writing, and so those are the things that we want to share. And absolutely, when we're interfacing with our patients and with community members, these are the kinds of things that we are talking with them about and really making it easy for them to understand. Next slide. I love this quote by Ira Byock: I have an advance directive, not because I'm seriously ill, but because I have a family. And so often we think that having an advance directive needs to begin when someone is acutely ill, seriously ill. But we know that as we share these things with communities, that this is the kind of thing that we need to be talking about from the age of 18 on. We want to have people talking about what their plans, what they would want their plans to be or to look like, and who would represent them. Next slide. So we talk about advanced care planning, and as clinicians, nurses, physicians, advanced practice nurses, social workers, and I know we've got social workers and nurses on here, we've got community advocates on here, and so goals of care conversations are those conversations that are initiated by a physician or other members of the interdisciplinary team with a patient and their family who may be considered seriously ill or chronically ill. We know that these kinds of conversations take place in different ways. Sometimes it's an initial conversation. You can go to the next slide, Jessica. It could be an initial conversation. It could be in the community. It could also be at a follow-up doctor's appointment visit. Medicare is paying for advanced care planning conversations for the annual wellness visit and also at other times. So sometimes there are triggers as to when we should have these goals of care conversations, talking with patients and their caregivers about what it is they desire. It's not a one and done conversation, right? So somebody may come into the emergency room because they have an exacerbation of their illness. Someone may find that they've been referred to palliative care or even to hospice. And yes, sometimes patients come to hospice and they don't have an advance directive or a DNR order. So these conversations take place in all sorts of ways. Now, obviously, we want people to have these conversations about what matters to them, what they desire early, before they have to be discussed in an acute care setting. But we want to be able to initiate these conversations through the work that we do. But also, many of you are out and about. I see that Vicki is on today. I know Jessica's team does some community outreach as well. Heather and I are very engaged in doing these kinds of things in North Carolina. So we're raising awareness with people about how they need to consider what their plans are. Next slide. So here are some challenges that we know research tells us, and I do have some wonderful references of research articles, guys, at the end of the slide deck, and so you will be receiving those. But here's some of the information that we know that clinicians tell us about the challenges they have when trying to initiate goals of care conversations. First of all, the clinicians tell us they have a lack of personal training or knowledge in terms of initiate difficult or goals of care conversations. So we have a lot of young people who may not have even experienced death and dying themselves, and they may have to engage in a conversation with a patient or their caregiver. They may not have had a course in residency or in their nursing curriculum or in social work curriculum, because the curriculums are pretty much set, and there has to be really intentionality and almost an act of Congress to change some of these curriculums because they're set by standards, national standards, as well as what happens at the state level. We have been very successful, though, in the Carolinas in being able to integrate some of our trainings through our evidence-based goals of care, serious illness conversation guide training. We've been able to do that in some of our different universities. But this is what we hear from clinicians. I'm uncomfortable or I'm anxious in having these conversations. I'm anxious because maybe I don't do this often. I'm anxious because I don't know how the family is going to respond. And so those are the kinds of things that we see that research tells us. We also know that most of the time we're in a transaction focused approach mode with our patients because of time constraints. So we have our tablet in front of us. We know there's certain questions that we have to ask, whether it's in the doctor's office or whether it's in an inpatient or outpatient setting. And so we're transactionally focused as opposed to being relationally focused with these conversations. This is a piece that really hinders those conversations from flowing and from being able to really help the patient and caregiver think about things that they may want, in the future. There's also the lack of cultural competency. And so when we talk about DEI training, sometimes we think it's just about the culture, but it's also about spirituality as well. It's also about a family culture as well. And so not having an understanding and those skill sets in terms of how do I engage in these conversations. And we have our own personal implicit biases. Last week I was in Portland and we had a panel presentation on implicit bias, and we don't realize that we all carry biases. And when it relates to end of life care planning and someone's decision to either pursue curative treatment and we feel like it's not appropriate, but that's what they want to do, we have our own biases about that because we want to put what we feel
Something
is
went wrong.
uh-oh.
Please try again.
We want to put something, hold on, I don't know what's going on with the phone. Boy. So we want to put our beliefs and our values on the patient because of our own biases. And so that can also interfere with us in terms of our conversations. And then lastly, when we talk about challenges that clinicians experience, it can also be related to our faith and spiritual values. We have in our society somehow felt like faith traditions and medicine should be separate. But really, when we look at what we do with the serious illness continuum, what we are seeing is that faith and medicine are integrated. And many of our patients, especially those who may be in Black and Brown communities, come with a faith tradition that is core for them, and that's how they view their world. That's how they make their decisions. Those are the things that are very important to them. Next slide, Jessica. One of the things I'll share with you is that when my mother was ill, and when she got stomach cancer in 1985 and had a gastrectomy, and then in about a year and a half, a year or so later, she was really, really ill. And what happened was the physician said to her that she had a nervous stomach, right? And he was giving her nerve pills. And I came home and I said, Mom, this doesn't look right. I was still working on the cancer unit, and I said, we need you to come to Columbia and let's see what my doctors have to say. So long story short, we came to Columbia. Mom had Mets to the colon and had to be hospitalized and had to have surgery. But for us, we were praying for the doctors, right? We had scriptures on the wall. We had worship music that was going in her room. And yes, I was an oncology nurse, but I also was an oncology nurse with a Christian faith tradition. And these were the things that were common for my mom that helped to frame her mindset that cancer was not going to just be a death sentence, that she was going to get through it. She was going to thrive. Well, she went into remission. And had 2 years with us, and then had a relapse, and then died in 1988. But it was so important for us to integrate our spiritual traditions in with the treatment that she was receiving. So faith community perspectives. Faith traditions should be assessed and integrated into the goals of care planning discussions with patients and their caregivers. I just read an article put out by Harvard that spirituality needs to be assessed like a social determinant of health. So in this article, the author called it the spiritual determinants of health, that we cannot be assessing the health of our patients without incorporating what are their spiritual beliefs and values. Also, these religious beliefs and values can help to inform the advanced care planning process and what treatments the patient will want at the end of life. Some, as we find many of them who are very strong in their spiritual beliefs, we find do less advanced care planning, want more aggressive treatment. But then there are others when they incorporate their spiritual leaders and helping them through the process, we find that this also helps with those outcomes as well. So understanding that the spiritual leaders in faith communities have great influence. These are the ones who are praying with your patients and checking on them in between your visits. They have a whole nother side to themselves besides what we see as a clinician in either the hospice setting, the palliative care setting, the physician's office, or whether they're in the hospital. We only see a slice of their life. And so that is why it's so important for us to do the assessments and incorporating what their traditions are, what they believe, what matters most to them as it relates to their spirituality. We know from research that most community leaders don't truly understand the whole advanced care planning process, but they do see it as something that's positive. I have seen that firsthand these last 2 years as pastors have been very open when we approach them about bringing this information to their congregation. And in one instance where I'm working with Dr. Johnson there at Duke University, they're working with a group of AME Zion churches, and the pastors were wanting to be trained first before they brought it and be a part of the curriculum development before we brought it to their church members. And we did a train the trainer program. Faith leaders also, as you think about this, they are involved with their members regarding those traditions. So although we have the chaplain that's in the hospital setting and chaplains that are engaged with hospice, we absolutely want to have a bridge with the faith community so we can understand what those faith traditions and values are all about. And then lastly, we cannot generalize, right? There are some things that we're going to know about certain traditions. I'm learning a lot about the Jewish tradition from Heather, my friend and colleague now with the work that we do with the North Carolina Serious Illness Coalition. And she's learning a lot about my traditions as we go into these African American churches, right? And so there has to be that posture that we have in terms of our curiosity. And we talk a lot about cultural humility, but we also have to have spiritual humility as well, that we can grow and learn from our patients and those that support them in terms of culture, geography, and the particular religious affiliations. It's never one size fits all, right? It's like sometimes we want to generalize when we talk about diversity and we see African Americans, and so we have a general view. And yes, there are some generalizations, but every family has its own unique nuance of culture within the culture. And the same thing applies when we think about what we are doing in terms of spirituality and working with patients and families. Next slide. So I want to just take a moment to talk about African American faith communities, because when we think about the kinds of disparities that are out there, I think it's appropriate for us to just sort of pull this away. I know sometimes that people get a little bit weary hearing about some of our specialty groups, but I think it's pertinent for us because the facts are out there that when you look at the top 10 health issues and disparities, we find that African Americans rise to the top in terms of heart disease, diabetes, cancer. When you look at just those three, you will find that there are kidney failure, those are those disparities. And so in order to really be able to dispel some of those and to provide a person-centered holistic approach, it's important for us to understand what is going on. So first of all, as I shared earlier, African Americans are less likely to participate in advanced care planning conversations rather than non-whites. We find this in the literature. Now, why is that? From a lived experience, and you talk about faith, many times, of course, in our communities, we are focused on prayer for healing and prayer for miracles. And because many of our individuals, their whole orientation around how you get through life struggles is through faith. And because they probably, like I did, had a praying grandmother, right? Also a praying mom. And so that is very central to our culture, where faith is a part of that. We're going to talk about prayer. We're going to talk about worship. We're going to talk about the younger folks are not probably as into going to church, and I'll talk about my young adults, right? But if something comes up, they're calling and saying, "Mom, we need to pray about this." So it's ingrained in the culture that prayer is a part of that process. We're more likely to desire aggressive treatment rather than utilize hospice. The statistics show us most recently that only 35% of African American Medicare decedents had hospice. So when you look at that, there is a disconnect around, if I choose hospice, am I taking hope away? If I choose hospice, I'm not going to get any more care. And so it's so important for us to dispel those myths and to be able to educate people about the benefits that they can receive at the end of life with palliative care or with hospice. We know that discrimination has historically been experienced by African Americans. The research tells us that a lot of that holds back African Americans in terms of impeding their trust. And so when you have been had things taken away from you. And then when someone comes to talk with you about what your plans are and they're sharing with you what the options are, it can appear that you're trying to take away their right to be able to pursue aggressive treatment. Now, we understand in the healthcare industry that there are sometimes the treatment options are no longer there. And so, how do we bridge that fear and mistrust with information and building trust? And that's what we are working on. Our culture and spiritual values sometimes conflict with advanced care planning. And so those treatment options that are there. I will tell you that in many cases, I'm called upon in my family for feedback or from people from the community on feedback, and I'm having to interpret for them what is being said because we need to say it in layman terms. We don't think about health literacy also as a barrier when we are dealing with some of our communities. And so we want our communities not to feel that we're trying to hasten death or to take away their hope. And so we have to reframe what hope looks like for our communities in terms of quality of life, in terms of relieving pain and suffering, but not hastening death. All right, next slide. Now it seems really quiet out there. You guys can put stuff in the chat if you want to, because I'm used to doing this in front of people and I can see your faces. So I can't see your faces today. All right, you can tell I'm that extrovert, right? So let's talk about some of the success strategies that research tells us about advanced care planning in faith communities. So one of the things that you will find is that when you want to expand your reach, you are wanting to do things in community and to raise awareness. And many of us have organizations that do wonderful community outreach. I know for us as a coalition, we were the recipients of a large grant to do advanced care planning outreach in 5 rural and underserved communities. And one of the things that each community was asked to do was to get a partner that was outside of the healthcare arena. So many of them chose to work with faith communities. And so in order to be successful in that, you have to get those leaders at the table. You need to make those leaders up your partner in doing this work and help them and allow them to be your advisors. In the work that we were doing in North Carolina, we do prep sessions with the pastors and the designated chairperson for the event. And when we sit down with them, we're talking about what's going to work best for that congregation in terms of the time of day it's going to happen. You know, so often we think that people are doing things during the week. Now, white churches do a lot of their meetings. They're done during the week because they do lunch and learns during the day, right? I've seen that because I've been to those events. Jewish communities also have some of these gatherings and they do them during the week, during the day. But in Black churches, a lot of times, most of their people are working during the week. And so we find that what works best is us doing Saturday programming. That's right. I know we're taking our Saturdays to go to churches and we're doing these programming and generally from 10 to 12, and we're providing some refreshments along with that. But we're getting that feedback and talking with the pastors about what works best for their community. It's not about what works best for us. It's sort of like when I talk to hospice providers about customizing a plan of care. And if you're going to have a family meeting and the people who are the primary caregivers work during the day because someone else is watching the patient during the day, that family meeting might have to happen after 5 o'clock. So we're going with not a cookie cutter approach when we're working with faith communities. We want to build trust by showing authentic investment of our time and our resources for the faith community. Now, for those of you who are applying for grants to work with these communities, you need to put in your budget that you are going to give some sort of stipend or honorarium to that particular faith community. That is a thank you for them allowing you to come into their congregation. We hear from researchers here a lot from our underserved communities, that folks will come into the community, do what they want to do for the grant, but then they don't hear back from them. A true investment is building a true partnership where it's not a one and done kind of situation, but we're doing these things on an ongoing basis, and we are raising up the infrastructure, if you will, in churches so that it can be sustained, and we are a resource to them. You want to have liaisons from your health system or your organization that reflects the communities that you serve. One of the things that one of our programs told us was that they really wanted them to provide trainers that looked like their congregation. Now, that was sort of a bold statement, right? But you're coming on our turf, and we would like for you, as best you can, to bring someone, let the messenger be someone who looks like us. And so there's a comfort level. There is this area of trust as well. And so what was done was that in these programs we've provided trainers, for the most part, who reflect the communities that we are trying to reach out to in terms of faith communities. So those pieces are very important. And it raises the trust level and your willingness to partner and to tailor make the program so that the people will receive the information. We find also that when you're putting together a curriculum, we're not handing them a curriculum that's already done, but we're allowing them to tell us, how do we tweak the curriculum? So our faith leaders are telling us that they want curriculums that incorporate their spiritual beliefs. They want advanced care planning not to look like it's this separate thing, but that based on their traditions and spiritual principles, that the foundations and tenets for their faith community, that advanced care planning is right in line with that. And so we have been able to do that as well. And then you want to build on whatever existing programs they have so that it's simple and it can be sustained. If it has to be something that's separate from what they're already doing, you want to incorporate it into their health ministry work that they're doing. You want to incorporate it in things that they're maybe doing with their senior program. You want to incorporate it in other things that may be going on so that it is aligned and it's not seen as something that's different, and it's considered something that's being built into the faith fabric as something that it's normal that we do. I know that there is a church in Boston with Dr. Gloria White Hammond, and her church engages in a series of advanced care planning workshops every year. And they have a congregation of probably about 500 members. And when they first started doing this a few years ago, they were really breaking into new ground. And now more than 50% of their congregants of their church have an advanced directive, because now it is seen as something that's a part of what the church does. It's not something that's sort of a separate program, but it is part of the fabric of the education information that the parishioners receive. And then we want to demonstrate cultural and spiritual humility. I love that I can go into a new situation and I can learn from that particular congregation. But I also know that there are things that we have in common. Our stories connect us. Our ability to relate person to person around those stories really takes it lowers the resistance and brings down the barriers and allows us to have this dialogue. And it is so amazing to see that happen. Next slide. So I wanted to give you some examples of, and I had to update my slides this morning because I said I need to give them some examples of what we mean when we talk about scriptural integration that supports ACP. One of the things that I don't have on my bio that I probably need to put on there is that I'm an ordained elder in my church. So I'm always engaged in teaching biblical lessons in my own faith community. And now I find myself with my nursing pieces around training communities and my spiritual background. I'm blending those things together. And because I understand some of the spiritual tenets that kind of are general in most of our churches, I'm able to bring in some of that integration to help people see that this is not something that is foreign, but it's something that can be found in Scripture. So I thought today that I would share with you some of these verses that we reference sometimes when I am doing these community presentations. So one of the things that we talk about is planning for care in advance. And so there is a passage of Scripture in Habakkuk chapter 2 that says, "Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision, make it plain on tablets that he may run who reads it." So we tie that back to the fact that when you have an advance directive, it is a plan for what you want in the future. And that plan allows your family to know what you desire, who the person is going to be your spokesperson. And if you get in a situation where you can no longer speak for yourself, your family can read this, understand it, and share it with those that need to know it at the appropriate time. And so this is a verse that often when I bring that up, I get head nods, right? It makes sense that, oh, this goes together. And then 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 1, because of one of those Old Testament kings, here's a passage that talks about Hezekiah. "In those days was Hezekiah sick unto death." All right, he had a terminal illness. "And the prophet Isaiah," one of the spokespersons for the children of Israel, came to the son of Amoz, who is the son of Amoz, gave the, they want to tell you who he's the son of, and says, "Thus saith the Lord, set your house in order, for you shall die and not live." And so oftentimes when we talk about this, we say, God is interested in us getting our affairs in order. Here is a king who is told to put his affairs in order. And so because they have heard these stories before, and we talk about putting your advanced care plans in order ahead of time, this is a scripture that resonates with the congregations. We talk about, and in this passage, how Hezekiah, if we talk about spirituality, turns his face to the wall. If you look at the context, he begins to pray, and he is given 15 more years to work on some things in his kingdom. And so we don't know that people are going to get that much time, right? But the point is that we try to underscore for them is that it is okay to put your affairs in order and have your plan ready. We often hear that some of the reasons too why people don't engage in advanced care planning in our communities is the fear of dying. And so we bring up the scriptures that really talk about how we don't have to have that fear. And so this one here is where Jesus is speaking to Martha and Lazarus, her brother, has died, and he's having a conversation with her. "I am the resurrection and the life. He that believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" You see, central to Christian faith beliefs in African American churches, this is a scripture that is one that they hear quite often. And the need to understand that I don't have to be afraid when I have these conversations that death is like right around the door. And this is why we encourage people to have these conversations early. And then in 2 Timothy 1:7, which is another familiar passage of scripture, "For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power." In other words, he's empowered me to make choices of love and of a sound mind, that I can plan. I'm empowered to put the plan together and to let my family know what it is that I desire. Next slide. And then when we talk about the origination of faith principle, where many folks will say, well, I don't want to talk about this because I'm going to make it happen sooner. And I hear this when I'm in churches, and I mention this concept that because they've heard culturally, they've grown up with hearing, well, don't talk about death and dying because you're going to make it happen sooner. And so, and many times it's tied back to some scriptural reference. So Proverbs 18:21, "Death and life are in the power of tongue, and they that love it will eat the fruit thereof." And then St. John 6:63, where Jesus says, "It's the spirit that quickeneth, the flesh profits nothing, but the words I speak to you, they are spirit and they are life. So in essence, some of our faith community members in the African American community believe that the more they talk about death, they're creating an atmosphere for that death to come more quickly. And so we deal with that issue in terms that making an advanced care plan is not creating an atmosphere for death, but it's creating an atmosphere for a plan. And not for death to be hastened. And then also we bring up there are individuals in scripture who had an advanced care plan. So we look here at Apostle Paul, who is talking with one of his mentors, Timothy, and he's giving him instructions of what to do because his time is near, giving him instructions about how to conduct himself. Endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, make full proof of your ministry, for I am now ready to be offered. I'm getting ready to leave, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have already fought the fight and finished my course, but here are things that I'm giving you that you will need to do when I'm gone. Next slide. And then, of course, Jesus, right? One of the main characters in the Christian faith. He is the one that Christian faith is built upon. And so Jesus also had an advanced care plan, right? He is at the Last Supper with the 12 disciples, and he says to them, I desire to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. He's alluding to the fact that he's going to go to the cross. And so in that conversation, he begins to talk with them about things of the future and things that they're going to need to do, what's going to happen after his death. And so he was preparing the disciples so that they would know what was ahead. And what we do as families is we share these with our community members, that you're putting a plan that can help prepare your family so that they are not under duress if things change with your health status. And then Jesus at the cross, we see here that he is there with his mother, and he's there with one of his disciples, and he gives instructions about who is to care for his mother and lets his mother know who is going to care for her. And so we see in this passage of scripture that once again, Jesus is at the 9th hour, but he is thinking about the future for his mother. Not just his disciples, but also for those people that are in his family as well. Next slide. You guys did not know that today you were going to be going to church, but I need you to understand that these are the kinds of things that we weave into our talks, and it aligns ACP for our faith communities to know this. And these are things also that are also shared, not just in African American faith communities, but also in our other communities as well. Our white congregations who have a strong Christian focus, these are scriptures that resonate with them as well. I have found too, when I go to Jewish communities, they all have their advanced care plans put in place. When I go to white faith churches, most of them have had these talks and have gotten their affairs in order. But when I go to black churches, guys, many of them have not had the discussion, and many have not executed an advance directive. So if we're going to dispel disparities, if we're going to talk with African American patients and families who have a strong faith core, we have to understand where they are coming from. So when we're doing these workshops, that's right, Lori, we've got to meet our audience where they are. That's right. And so many of our workshops that we do are so successful. And I wanted to share with you what we are finding works for us when we are in these communities. Number one, as I shared from the outset, we're utilizing the faith leaders to help us plan the sessions. Heather and I were talking this week, and we have a session next week on May the 18th at a church in Winston-Salem, and she was doing the prep session. She normally does the prep session with the leaders before we go, and I usually will do the workshop, and then we help people get their directives done. So the pastor was saying to Heather, okay, so we need to open with prayer. And she said, yeah, we open with prayer. We absolutely open with prayer when we go, and we have a song. And so she's telling that he says, no, we need to open with prayer for this meeting. And so Heather and I were laughing about it, that even when you have a prep session with a particular congregation before the workshop, their tradition is to pray before they start the meeting. They want to get the guidance from the Lord as to the success and the planning for that particular meeting. And so she said, Marisette, I was so dense, I didn't get it. If she were on, she would tell you guys the story, but she couldn't be on today. That just happened a couple of days ago. So when you set up the prep session with your faith communities, you want to allow them to take the lead because you're going to be in their space, in their territory. Number two, you want to incorporate their faith traditions during the workshop. The opening remarks by the faith leader. Let the faith leader introduce you, right? Let them, because it's their congregation, they are able to relieve the anxiety that members in the congregation may have because of this particular topic. Sometimes they think we talk about advanced care planning, they think we're talking about funeral planning, right? Sometimes they're talking about, life, they think we're talking about life insurance. And sometimes they think we're coming there to talk about setting up a will and estate planning. So the faith leader of that particular congregation sets the stage, and they set that stage by opening with prayer, and they invite the Lord into the setting because this is what their congregation is used to. Nothing starts in a church without prayer. And then also there is a song, because that song is a part of the worship and it sets the atmosphere for the congregation to be in a receptive mode. Now, we're used to when we do workshops like we did today, we just open up and start doing what we do. But when you're in a different community, you have to follow what their traditions are, because if you want to get the great outcome, you need to incorporate what matters to them. And what matters to them is not just our information, but what matters to them are their spiritual traditions. And so we find that when we do that, it shifts the learning atmosphere for us so that we're able to go forth, and there is such a receptivity that happens. And then the other thing that we do is we want the individuals to incorporate their stories, that it's not just about what we share, but we hear from them in terms of their stories around caring for a loved one, having to make decisions for a loved one. So I poll the group. How many of you have had a loved one that you had to be the spokesperson for? And then I get a couple of those individuals to share their story. Sometimes the story is, I had no warning and I did not know what they wanted. And sometimes the story is, yes, they told me what they wanted and it made it so much easier. So we get both sides of the coin, right? And that really allows the members of the congregation to connect with their peers, their fellow parishioners, around this whole issue of the benefits of advanced care planning. Then we always express our thanks and our gratitude to the leadership for being there. We don't take for granted that people allow us to come into their space. And so we are clear about that we appreciate the opportunity to be with them. Refreshments always help. Food is something, food and church go together. A lot of times there's morning refreshments, or if you can provide a lunch, get a sponsor to do it. Find a way to do that. That always helps to get more people in the room. And then if you're in a position that you can do an honorarium, if you've asked them to host, not that they invited you to come, but you asked them to host because of this partnership, you have some grant dollars that you can do. We find that that's also, many of our churches especially small churches, took a huge hit during COVID. Some churches even closed. And so the financial resources of the church, just a little bit, goes a long way that helps them with their programming as well. Next slide. I think this is my last slide coming up, and then we're going to open up for questions. We're going to be able to let you guys go a little bit sooner today. So what about clinician strategies? So I've given you sort of what clinicians struggle with. I've talked with you about African-American communities and the perspectives of leaders, et cetera, what works when we do outreach. And so you say, well, how does that tie in with what I'm going to do as a clinician? Well, if you are engaged in doing outreach, you get to understand what's happening with faith communities, and then that gives you a way to be able to ask them what matters to them and to understand their values when you ask those questions. So number one, just like we do with diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging, we have to check our own spiritual faith biases. We may not be individuals who are very religious. And for faith communities, they don't really think of it as being religious. They think of it as their spiritual values and beliefs and traditions. And so they don't think of it as just the rituals in terms of faith, prayer, and communion. They think of it as this is how we live our lives, with this faith-centric focus, and everything else flows out of that. So you want to engage in religious curiosity and cultural humility. You definitely don't want to be afraid to ask questions regarding what their faith traditions are, and that will help inform you how to put that plan of care together. I did not realize until I cared for a few Jewish patients that when their loved ones die, they have a ritual in terms of how they prepare the body, and they don't keep those patients long, their loved ones long. Within 24 to 48 hours, they've already had the memorial service or the funeral. Whereas in African American communities, it's not uncommon that the funeral may take a week or even more, because we're trying to make sure that people can get home that are part of the family, and there could be some financial resource issues that are being worked out with the funeral home. There are a lot of factors that go into that, and so those traditions vary from community to community. You want to engage in relational interactions by asking the patient caregiver their story and asking them what matters most to them. You want to find out what they know about their illness and what are the things that they believe. And when you begin to do that, you will find that you will open them, they will be opened up to share and to talk with you. And what are their fears? What's keeping them awake at night? Those are the things that are so important. And yes, it may seem like, oh, I just don't have a time to do a deep dive, but you can begin the conversation, and then we have a team that can also work with us. So you pull in the chaplain who can connect with them and possibly connect with their faith community. You pull in the social worker as well. And so it's a team approach in terms of how we put this plan of care together. And those relational moments that you have, they give you a long runway to building trust with that patient and their caregiver. You want to incorporate their beliefs and traditions into that plan of care development. So if they ask you, can I play music in my room? I want to have some worship music. Absolutely. Whatever is going to create an atmosphere that enhances the quality of time that they have. Whether they want communion, is that something that they want? What programming do you have on the television in terms of spiritual programming? Sometimes you can't even find spiritual programming on the television in the hospital. And so think about, that's also part of that faith tradition. What kind of programming do we have available for our patients and for their traditions? Now, a lot of hospitals will have a Bible, but is that what that particular faith tradition is the Holy Bible? Do we have other materials that reflect other faith traditions that would be comforting to a patient and their family? And then we also want to welcome any questions that people have. Be open and honest about answering those questions, and making sure that they understood what you said, and using terms that a layman can understand, putting it in a language that works for them, and giving them good examples that they can connect to about what those treatment options might look like. Recently, my husband had to have a specialist appointment at Lexington, and right off the bat, of course, as a nurse, we always have questions to ask, right? But I watched how the physician sat down and chatted with my husband and made him at ease, and found out a little bit about him before he went into the explanation of the treatment options for him. And so those are the things that make the difference in building a trusting relationship. And then you want to honor what the patients say that they want, even if you don't think it's the right choice. And sometimes the choices they make, it's tough for us to accept the choice that someone's making if we feel like they need to go the route of comfort as opposed to more treatment. But it's not our journey, it's their journey. And we're called alongside to give them accurate information and to honor as best we can what they desire. And sometimes they want this for a certain while, and then reality begins to set in, and then you revisit the conversation, not badgering the patient and the caregiver, but bringing it in at appropriate intervals. All right. So, next slide. I believe those are, oh, these are some amazing references here. You guys are going to love reading these. They give you so much good information in terms of perceptions as it relates to different faith traditions, African American communities, and looking at some of those variables in terms of how we have conversations, what impacts clinicians. And then on the last slide, I believe I put down some of wonderful training resources that are evidence-based training programs that are available to us to help our clinicians. And many of them have begun to incorporate a cultural lens in terms of these conversations and spirituality. So Ariadne Labs, Vital Talk, Respecting Choices, LNEC, and I should have also added the Conversation Project also has some good materials as well. You can go to our website as well, www.mylifemychoices.org, and you can also get this information. And so we're going to stop sharing the slides, Jessica, and I want to hear from the group. I know many of you are engaged in communities, and I'd love to hear some of your perspectives of what you have been learning when you're working with faith communities. Anything that you'd like to share or to add?
Well, this is Jenny. I've got a quick question. I
Yes.
haven't heard much recently about the formal parish nurse program that used to
Yes.
exist in different communities.
Yes.
Can you speak to that? Is that still a thing, or has it transitioned, or just anything you may know about that?
I absolutely know a lot about that as I am a member of the South Carolina Community Faith Nurses Association.
Perfect.
uh, and so anyway, there are years ago, the hospitals used to be the backbone for community nursing programs. But the funding for that dried up, and so Baptists and ANMed and some of the other churches actually had formal nursing programs, community faith nursing programs, where they did outreach and education in faith communities. Now we have certain churches have actually, they fund it themselves, but it's not something that is done in every church. In some communities, particularly in African American communities, they don't have a budget set aside for a parish nurse, but they do have a faith auxiliary department. Now, in some of our other churches, some of our white churches, many of them have crafted having a part-time nurse that is a part of the congregation. In terms of the South Carolina Community Faith Nurses Association, there we have probably about 50 members across the state of South Carolina, and many of them are doing, in Columbia, there's a wonderful person at the Catholic Church there on Divine Street. She is doing stuff with Latino communities around health issues. They're not just dealing with advanced care planning, but they're dealing with a lot of various health concerns. They also follow up. My good friend Anita Bolin is there in Lexington with one of the Lutheran churches. They follow up with parishioners who probably have had a hospitalization during COVID. They were making phone calls, checking in on some of their frail parishioners, and they bring educational programming into the churches. So what you could do is, when you're trying to do something with a congregation, find out if they have a nurse on staff. If they don't, then ask them if they have a health ministries. If they don't have that, then you want to go through the senior ministries, because of course they are always doing lunch and learns and bringing people in to do talks. But yes, parish nursing, is alive and well. There is a national Parish Nurse Association. There are folks that go through the training to be a parish nurse. We have an annual conference in Columbia once a year, the first Friday in August, and I'm engaged with the planning for the sessions for that. And often I'm doing training with the parish nurses on advanced care planning and distributing our materials that they can share. And this week we had a few people that joined us for a couple of our sessions. So yes, very much alive and well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Livonia, do you mind sharing? I see your comment here in terms of respecting their religious beliefs. Absolutely.
Yes, hi, good morning. So we had this topic in our last information referral specialist meeting in Columbia about trying to incorporate the faith-based communities instead of trying to run away from them because, as you mentioned on yesterday, they are big stakeholders in the communities and they can be an awesome way for us to get in without having to do all the work. So there are some talks about even the resource specialists around the state trying to, do more with the faith base.
Yes, yes, yes. You want to get them at the table. One of the things that I find that in hospices are doing more of this is creating advisory groups where they're bringing in community-based organizational representatives, and that could be faith community, it could be others that can advise them about what the information that they're wanting to get out. If you can recall back during the civil rights movement, you know that, of course, a lot of that was done through the churches. Martin Luther King Jr. was key to that, and he was a pastor. And so the influence that pastors have, the gatherings that come together, this kind of health education information, we can do it through the churches. Many of them have healthcare professionals. And so if you can get them engaged and have them to be one of the trainers and be a part of what you're trying to do, or do a curriculum that they then can embrace and they can then do with the congregation, we can then we can dispel these disparities, because it's the lack of knowledge that these communities that knowledge that they don't have, that impacts their ability to really prosper as it relates to health issues and concerns. So definitely something that that we want to do. Vicki, I know that you guys are out in communities a lot in North Carolina, and definitely want to hear your perspective. If you felt like I was off base today, just go ahead and tell us. Get me straight, Vicki. Oh goodness. Uh-oh. Vicki's can't get unmuted. Very good, very good. I see you're off of mute, Vicki. Anything you want to share? All right. Are there any other questions for me? We're going to wrap up. And if you have any other questions, I hope that that you found this beneficial to give you sort of another perspective of what goes on out there. I want to thank you for what you're doing in communities as well, and sharing with you what we are finding as we are out and about across. I'm learning about little towns that I didn't even know existed in South Carolina and in North Carolina. So anyway, it is my pleasure to be able to do that, and I am just humbled to be able to be in these congregations. So I want to encourage you as you're dealing with patients and families. So many years I worked as a nurse in hospice, and I had patients that I saw, and many of them did not look like me. And but I was successful because of the human touch. And when you connect with people from a place of love and human compassion, and you give them good information, you can bridge any gap. You can absolutely bridge any gap. So anyway, want to remind you, of course, that we do have the evaluations we want you to share, and we'll put those in the chat for you. You're going to get an email, and we want you to evaluate each of our days. And then we also want you to share with us other topics that you'd like us to cover. We will resume our South Carolina Coalition monthly meetings starting in June, as we have used everybody's time this week. So we're giving you the rest of the month of a little bit of a break. And then we'll start back with our monthly meeting, which happens on the third Wednesday of the month at 2 o'clock from 2 to 3:30. We are going to pick up some of the themes from this week that we had some great discussions around. And so we'll be adding that to our monthly topic list as well. If you're interested in working with our coalition, we absolutely can use you. And so certainly email us and let us know. Oh yeah, Lavanya, we'd love for you to attend. I'm gonna put my information in the chat. And so just send me your information. We'll get you added to the network. There is no membership fee, which is great. It is free. And so we want everyone to participate in the monthly meetings. And we certainly love to highlight too what's going on in our state. So oftentimes we'll bring in people to update us. Most recently, I got something from the Institute of Medicine and Public Health around a transportation report that they did. I did not realize this. We know that rural areas, it's hard for people to get around. And with our social isolation task force, of which we participated with that task force, one of the areas of concern was the lack of transportation. Only 30% of our South Carolina residents have a vehicle. 30% have one vehicle. And so if the person who's working has the vehicle and the patient has got to get to an appointment, there goes the challenge. So anyway, those kinds of things we bring to the forefront that folks are doing that relate to how we care for seriously ill patients. So definitely want you guys to participate in our meetings as well, and join one of our committees as well. All right. Well, have an amazing weekend. Thank you again, Jessica, for your help today, and Lori for the introduction. Wilma was absolutely adamant that I should not introduce my own self. So Lori, thank you for stepping in, for doing that today and facilitating our time together. Yeah, we don't have, in rural areas, we don't have a lot of folks that have transportation. So lots of things when we talk about our partnering with community stakeholders and the work that's being done. So have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and we will see you again real soon. Look for our emails in about a week with the link for the slides and for the recordings. Thank you.